Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of DDJ's Inferno. It's been a little while since I've run the Sunday show. I'm not quite sure what time I'm going to be running it yet, but basically, I was going to hold off on doing another DDJ's Inferno for a while. However, we have a guest today that I think deserves to have his story told and to have a conversation with so that we can try to help this individual or at least provide some direction. But more importantly, as I spoke to this person behind the scenes, one of the things that I've noticed is that this person's story is very common. And so I've invited MGTOW Esquire and a few other people here today to kind of weigh in on things and to kind of had a roundtable conversation. So with that said, everybody, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, starting with APOC.
Hello, everybody. I'm Apocrypha, and I'm an erstwhile moderator and otherwise philosophy guy.
MGTOW Esquire. I'm an attorney in several jurisdictions, and looking forward to helping the guest.
And I am Lone Wolf, Red Pill Man and firearms enthusiast.
And I'm single dad in 1990. I'm just grateful for everyone's help on this. Just trying to fight for my kids, and then thank you very much.
Absolutely. And then, of course, finally, Plumber.
And I'm the plumber. I've already been through what single dad's going through, so maybe I can give him a pointer or two.
There you go. And Plumber, your mic's a little bit low, just a little FYI.
Okay, is that better?
Yeah, that's good. All right, so guys, so obviously it's been a little while since I've done a live stream, but I've spoken with APOC and with a few other people. So in addition to doing DDJ's Inferno, I'm going to start running a second show called the Red Pill Roundtable. And I talked a little bit about it in the announcement video today, but I wanted to kind of take care of a little bit of housekeeping before we got started. So I haven't decided when, like what day or time I'm going to do that yet, but I think I'm going to either put a poll on either gab.com or minds.com and let people vote on what days they think are the best to do that sort of thing. And then, like I said in the announcement video, in addition to that, my website is currently down because we're doing major updates. Originally, it was just primarily a landing page, but now we're actually going to be using it as a destination point. So there'll be links to all my video channels, of course, my books. And I say books because the second one is going to be coming out sooner than later. And in addition to that, there'll be memes and there'll be links to social media as well. And of course, an additional way to contact me as I bring out more live stream shows. So in other words, if you want to be a guest on the show, if you have any questions or concerns or anything like that that you want to bring up on a live stream, definitely reach out to me right now at missandry.happens@gmail.com. And obviously, don't forget to check out my sponsors, The Dollhouse and the Cash and Prizes documentary, The Real Reason You're Not Married. So with that said, Single Dad 1990, I do appreciate you reaching out to me. I know we've been talking a little bit behind the scenes. Why don't you go ahead and tell the audience a little bit about your story and your situation and a little bit of the history so that people can get a better idea of where you're coming from, and then we can kind of dive in. So go for it.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. So a few years ago, my ex filed for divorce. It was sudden and unexpected. Hadn't been any mention of it prior. And we have 5 kids. And my youngest.
Wait, whoa! You have 5 kids. I mean, I thought I had a lot with 4, but damn. I mean, I had 3 in an accident. So.
Yeah, it was very unexpected. My youngest was very young at that time. I had no idea about the process originally. I had no idea what to expect, in terms of how custody worked, divorce worked, division of, child support, how much the attorneys cost, nothing. Had knowledge about it. And my ex had a very strong attorney that she hired right away, that basically specialized in taking dads down. And so even though I was a work from home dad who provided, from many witnesses signed affidavits stating that I was not only the primary breadwinner, but also the primary care provider. It felt right away like a very uphill battle. I hired an attorney with whatever money I had, on the promise that it wouldn't cost more than $5,000. And of course, we all know that's laughable in hindsight, but at the time, I was told this should be a very simple thing. It should be, a 50-50 sort of thing. And, even though I wasn't too happy with that because I had serious concerns about my ex's parenting, I felt like, okay, I mean, I'd heard horror stories, of course, you hear this just in society. So I thought, okay, well, if I can avoid putting my kids through a long drawn out custody battle and just get 50-50, and, over time, maybe I can increase it, especially as they get older and they'll want to be with me more.
Right. And let me kind of interject here a little bit too. Now, even though you were a stay-at-home father, weren't you the primary breadwinner?
I was both. I worked from home, so my ex didn't work. I was the sole provider, but also I was the primary care provider as well. I mostly worked when my children were asleep, and I took care of them either by myself or together with my ex when they were awake. So and I made a decent living. I wasn't wealthy by any means, but a decent living. We had
okay. And so you said you had 5 kids. I remember when we talked before. Correct me if I'm wrong. You said the oldest you adopted, like it was from a prior relationship.
That's correct.
Okay, so you basically took over somebody else's saved game. And I will say this. I mean, I remember you did say something too. You remember the story that you told me offline about the situation around that childbirth? Can you kind of share that with the audience here as well?
In terms of how
who she wanted to be with and that kind of thing.
Well, it seemed very in hindsight, it seemed clear that I was not the first choice, and had the biological father wanted to be in the picture, that would have been who was chosen, but he didn't want to be in the picture, so I was kind of the alternate, and I at the time I didn't really perceive that, but looking back on it now, I see it was pretty obvious.
Okay, and so you ended up. So basically, the attorney told you that you were going to pay about $5,000 to get your entire divorce done. Talk to me a little bit about how that played out.
Okay, so and part of that was also the hiring of a guardian ad litem, which was a disaster. But again, I'm following the guidance, the advice of counsel, who is very confident, who's looking at the case and saying, okay, yeah, there's no accusations of any, bad behavior, no physical abuse, no, sexual, misbehavior, nothing going on where it's just a pretty no fault sort of divorce on my end and her end as well. So it should be, fairly easy to get this at a 50-50. That's how it was presented to me. And I get the sense that that's how it's presented to a lot of dads, just to get them in the door. And that in reality, that's a pipe dream.
Okay, so let's stop here. Just kind of recap. So basically, if I understand correctly, you were a father of 4. You had 4 children with her. You adopted her oldest child that she had prior to getting with you. And then in addition to that, you were the primary breadwinner and you were a stay-at-home dad at the same time because you worked from home. Then on top of that, when you filed the divorce, she didn't make any allegations or accusations against you of any kind. It was just like a divorce. Our relationship is over. There's no abuse allegations. There's no violence allegations or anything like that. No parenting allegations, nothing.
At first, later on in the divorce, she made some allegations of me being controlling, financially controlling. Nothing serious. No serious accusations of like physical abuse or anything like that. But some trumped up, ridiculous sort of basically it amounted to accusations of me being controlling.
Right. Well, let me kind of talk about that a little bit. And thank God that you actually had your divorce in the United States and not in Canada or the United Kingdom or Australia, because those countries have coercive controlled domestic violence laws. So basically what that means is that if your ex made an allegation of you being controlling in regard to the finances, they could get a DV claim against you. And basically you would get hammered with the silver bullet as though you had actually physically assaulted her. It's used a lot in the United Kingdom, and it's well settled law in the United Kingdom and Canada, as well as Australia and other places as well. They've been trying to bring it to the United States. So far, most jurisdictions have not adopted anything near it yet. But I do know that there's a lot of feminists agitating for this sort of thing. So with that said, I mean, even though thank God in this particular case and in the United States that most allegations of financial control are kind of just, waved off as minor, because in the reality they are, but, eventually they could escalate. So appreciate the interjection. So continue.
Yeah, and of course at that point I'm thinking, okay, a guardian ad litem is hired. I've submitted my documentation, my witness testimony, had all my, people who knew both of us, not just who were friends of both of us, family acquaintances, not specifically my friends, but just everyone I could think of who could give an objective and accurate representation of how our home life was and so forth. And I thought that was it. What more could there be? It would go before the judge, and there, it would be over and done with. And a year later, and $60,000-$70,000 later, it still hadn't been ever gone to court. Still had not had my day in court. And in the interim, it was just a constant, steady process of my ex's attorney dragging things out and my attorneys being unable to just get the case before a judge with the simple simple trying of the facts.
Well, let me ask you this. So are you saying that, just to clarify, are you saying that you did not get even a hearing, like no motion hearing or anything?
I had, there were along the way, I think there was a hearing to put into place a temporary order to govern things until the final was put into place. Just because it was dragging out so long and we didn't have anything formal in place. I think there was another hearing to demand discovery on something that my attorneys had not filed, and all the things that her attorney had discovery for. The vast majority of them were completely irrelevant. They weren't. They were just busy work. It was like giving my attorney busy work, and also giving my attorney the opportunity to bill me more to take care of that busy work. And so that's literally all it was, is discovery after discovery after discovery. And my attorney, instead of finding a way to get this done and in front of a judge, it was like more excuse for my attorney to bill me to take care of these discoveries.
Right. Well, let me ask you this. Let me jump in here again. I apologize. MGTOW Esquire, what's your feeling on everything you've heard so far? What are you thinking so far? Feedback.
Well, it sounds to me like his attorney was having trouble getting the judge involved, because some jurisdictions have a thing called a request for judicial intervention, and it's frequently in the jurisdictions that I practice, it is filed after some significant negotiation between the two attorneys. But it's getting the judge involved is what's the best way to do it. Is that, and you would do it once the negotiations break down, and then you'd have a judge trying to either strong arm a settlement, or a judge trying to get a trial to happen. So it could be that was just the custom in that jurisdiction. Right. And that may be why things broke down and turned into just discovery after discovery after discovery.
Yeah, and from the very beginning, there was never. It was clear there was never going to be any meeting of the minds, because I remember the one and only time I met with the guardian ad litem. She asked me, "Well, what do you, what are you willing to settle here?" And I said, "Well, I have serious concerns about my children's safety, on a lot of levels with my ex, but I don't have the ability to prove anything. I don't have any evidence. Just my own word against hers. And so I'm willing to settle for 50-50, whereas my ex from get-go was insisting on 2 days a month for me. So it was very clear from the very beginning there was never going to be any kind of a settlement, and she didn't budge, the whole time. And of course, I'm not going to budge any further than 50-50. And my attorneys aren't telling me to at that point. My attorneys are just saying, "Oh yes, everything's going to be fine." And meanwhile, they're just continuing to bill me and continue to bill me and continuing to bill me. Never did have a trial date scheduled. It finally, after a year, settled because I ran out of money. And there was a complication. One of the discoveries, ironically, was my own evidence. It was the notes, or the final analysis of the different mental health counselors that I'd seen over the course of the whole year long. I'd seen 3 different counselors, basically because number one, I wanted, one of them was in regard to my children and how I should help them through navigate the thing, and how I can be the best father I could be. And then the other 2 were basically to be able to establish that I had been advised that I should, it would be a good idea to demonstrate that I've seen a professional and they've verified that yes, I'm a perfectly mentally healthy individual. And so I saw these 3 individuals, and all 3 of them gave me glowing reports, and it was my evidence. It was saying, this individual shows no signs of being a controlling, et cetera, and so on. No, not at all. It was solely my choice to do that. It was I was advised by my attorney that would be a good idea, to be able to counteract anything that because after a while she started getting nasty and claiming, like I said, that I was a controlling person and not balanced to be able to be a 50% parenting parent. And so these counselors were their report after having seen me for months every week was, that this individual is very healthy, past, they ran all sorts of diagnostics on me, and so it was very powerful. Their final reports were very powerful endorsements of me. But the discovery had been for their reports, and my attorney never forgot to file that particular discovery. And so her attorney moved to actually hold me in contempt and sanction me by dismissing my entire response, so that the petitioner's original petition would be accepted as if I had never been a respondent. That was her attorney's demand as this to be the sanction. And mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, that's a pretty serious terminating sanction that they were trying to do. And if it's because, I mean, did they even ask for the counselor's notes or the reports? Because if they didn't do that, then I don't understand why they'd be trying to hold you in contempt.
Oh no, they did, and they did. It's and they filed discovery for so many different things,
Of course.
and apparently that they had discovery for those counselor reports, and my attorney simply and it was also had to do with the fact that I had 4 attorneys over the course of a year. I ran out of, I passed $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 with the first attorney. And then I ran out of money for a period of a month or two. And so she withdrew, and I had to hire a second attorney. When the first one withdrew, the second attorney then moved out of the area. I didn't run out of money, moved out of the area. Then the third attorney, again, paid another $15,000 or so, ran out of money again. And then I've hired a fourth attorney, after I gathered some more money together, who took it to the final settlement. But the point is somewhere along those 4 attorneys, that particular discovery request slipped through the cracks, and it never got filed. And my guess is that's probably what the opposing counsel was hoping for, that one of these mini discoveries would fall through the cracks, and then she could go and say, "Oop, sanction, we never got this. We demanded it on such and such a date, and we never got it." And so, because my attorneys probably filed, I don't know, 20 different responses to different discovery requests on all these other things, my finances, my emails, my phone records.
It just sounds like it was
on and on.
Yeah, it just sounds like it was death by 1,000 cuts.
Yeah, and the thing is that when we, my final attorney told me, look, yeah, it seems absurd that the judge would give her a default judgment based on your attorneys not submitting your own supporting evidence, because this is my evidence saying I'm a great guy. And it would seem bizarre that the judge would do that. But he said, with this particular judge, that it could go either way. And he told me flat out, if he rules against you, you're going to get 2 days a month, and you're going to have to appeal, and you could be looking at a year or two at who knows what odds to get this appealed at a cost through the roof, or we get the best settlement we can. And so he went to the opposing attorney and said, look, we have a good case for malpractice against his other attorneys for not submitting this in time. We feel we have a great shot at an appeal here. It's his evidence. All the stuff is supporting of him. There's no way appellate court is going to uphold a default judgment, basically depriving this man of his parental rights and depriving his children of their father based on his attorney's negligence, submitting his own evidence. So we were able to strike out a settlement that amounted to me getting about 27% of the time with the kids, and paying an exorbitant amount in terms of monies to her. But it was the best that I was facing a 50, a coin flip of losing everything.
Well, let me ask you. Let me ask you this. Actually, MGTOW Esquire, did you want to say something?
No, I just.
Okay.
It sounds like, I've heard this story countless times. This is fairly customary. You got a bad circumstance that's made worse by an attorney's goof up, and then you have a position where you have to settle, and it's just it's grim.
Right. And frankly, I probably would have ended up without that, because I was about to run out of money with the fourth attorney, and there was no other source for money later. So I was going to be out of an attorney needing to settle anyway, even if I didn't have that, because, again, there was no end in sight. It was clear her attorney was just going to continue to drag it out until there was no money left.
And I think the thing that's especially egregious to me is that you guys had filed divorce. There was no trial schedule. There was no trial date. It was just, we're just going to continue these fishing expeditions, because that's really what it amounts to. And at the end of the day, you spent $60,000 to $70,000 and probably drove yourself into major amounts of debt, and you ended up getting screwed in the trade. And she wasn't working at all, was she?
No, at that point, no, she still wasn't working.
Right. Now, did she have any kind of degree or education or anything like that?
She had an associate's degree.
Do you remember in what?
No, it's just a general studies associate's AA degree.
Okay. So then the next question is, so they didn't impute her income at all for child support or anything, did they? No,
they imputed it at minimum wage. Yeah, they imputed it at minimum wage. And the thing is they didn't use any calculator, because my business that had been a very solid business, I made a good living for years and years and years. As is the story with so many dads, the process of the divorce, it fell apart, and not just because of emotional, but the time that I had to spend on my own legal stuff, trying to do it, to avoid, the billings by the attorneys, or in the interim periods where I didn't have an attorney, trying to do things myself. My business, which required 70, 80 hours a week, to really do well, it fell apart. So at the time of the final settlement, I was only making roughly $2,000, maybe $2,500 a month tops. $2,000, $2,500.
Well, and the other interesting thing here is that, and for anybody who's listening, so typically when child support is determined, they typically don't impute at minimum wage, especially not a person who has an associate's degree. If you look at the child support worksheets and you look at what's called imputation of income, and MGTOW Esquire, jump in here if I step off the reservation. But basically the idea is, in real broad strokes, is that one of the things that you do is you figure out the age of the person, and every state has a different level of income that that person should be earning based on their age. Now, obviously, if you have empirical evidence, like say, the average wage of a person in a particular job market, you might be able to deviate from that. Or if you have a set of circumstances where, let's say this person was an uneducated homemaker, maybe you deviate down from that as well. But the point of the child support worksheet and the imputation of income where a person isn't working is because unless they can prove otherwise, the courts will often consider them what's called voluntarily underemployed, which means that they're just choosing not to work because they just want to sit around and collect free money. And the courts take a dim view of that typically.
Well, and I will get onto that later with the issue that I'm currently facing. But with the child support demand right now, but
right.
In the state where this case is, apparently they let the moms claim whatever the hell they want to claim.
Right. But that's my concern is that usually these imputations of income are codified in law. So even though the courts may not enforce it, had the attorney stepped forward and said, no, we're not going to impute at minimum wage, we're going to impute here instead, you might have gotten a better outcome with relation to child support. The other piece of it is that though sometimes before a smart attorney, before they'll make a decision to go one way or another, they'll run the numbers both ways. So they'll run it at no income, minimum wage, and then whatever the income should be. And then whatever turns out to be the lowest child support, that's the one you want to go with when you're the paying parent. Right. That's the smart move.
Yeah.
But a lot of attorneys in the end of the day won't do that. And it sounds like what ended up happening is that they pretty much just got rubber stamped for anything that they wanted. And your attorney was just kind of boilerplate letting it happen.
Well, yeah, it was part of the settlement. Like in terms of the settlement, like I said, it never went before a calculator. There was no form. It was just, this is what she's demanding. She's demanding this much child support, this much alimony, this much pro rata share of expenses, and take it or leave it. So even though had we used the calculator, even imputing minimum wage to her, the total amount I would have paid would have been, something like $500 or something like that a month.
And what is it? And what was it instead?
It ended up being, if you added up all the expenses, it was child support, alimony, pro rata share of her daycare, pro rata share of all school expenses, tuition, supplies, tutoring, which she was the sole decider of. That was another thing that she insisted, that she was the sole, determiner of the where the kids go to school and what
You're talking
what
about sole decision making.
Anything else,
right?
And then pro rata shares of 75% of all other expenses. So it ended up being more than $2,000 a month. And at this time, like I said, I'm barely making $2,000 a month. So it ended up being at first more than my income. And even after a year, 2 years, 3 years, now 4 years into this, it's still more than, I'm making about $5,000 or so, and $2,000+ is still, it's crippling.
Well, yeah, it's 40% of your gross income, of course.
Right.
So now with that said, let's jump forward to the therapist and what's happening now and the fiasco that you went through most recently. Because now, and the reason I wanted you to tell that initial story is it struck me, and I think that MGTOW Esquire hit the nail on the head when he said that he's heard this countless times. I have too, and I would imagine that anybody who eventually watches this stream, they're going to understand that they're not alone. Because the big issue is that when you go through this sort of situation, you feel like you're alone. You feel like you're the only person, and it's the most horrible situation in your life. So,
right.
But it's very common, and this is one of the reasons why I like to refer to family court actions as systemic misandry and systemic discrimination. Because frankly, no judge in their right mind should have ever signed an agreement that says that, at the time you're making, let's say, $2,500 a month and you're having to pay over $2,000 a month in settlement, there's no way that a judge would go, no, that's equitable. That's equitable. Go ahead and screw this guy, and she can have 80% of his income. That just, to me, that seems unconscionable and completely out of scope. MGTOW Esquire, did you want to weigh in on this?
I do. I have a question. Was the judge that signed the divorce decree, was it actually a judge, or was it an attorney referee who signed it?
No, it was the judge who signed it. I mean, the attorneys hammered out the agreement.
Oh, I mean,
they signed it and they took it before the judge, and the judge.
Okay. So, did you ever appear before that judge, or no?
Yes, to have that judgment put into effect. That was the I was in front of that judge 3 times. The first to put the temporary order into it. The second, when I was notified that there was that discovery that hadn't been sanctioned for, and then the third, which was the hearing was actually supposed to be for the judge to give his decision on what the sanction was going to be, but it actually turned into off on the agreement that was handled.
Yeah, I just wanted to check to be sure, because it would answer DDJ's question there if it wasn't actually a judge that signed it.
Right.
Some jurisdictions have these things called attorney referees. Most of the attorney referees, some of them are good, but very. So I just wanted to check on that. But that's where I was weighing in on.
All right, you cut out just for a second there, MGTOW Esquire. So you're saying that some of the attorney referees are good, but some are not. Is that where you were headed?
Most are not.
Got it. Okay. So now we fast forward. Now that divorce was what, 3 or 4 years ago?
Yeah. And on the way, one of the things that was put into place with the judgment was that the children would go to see a child counselor, therapist, child psychologist, and the 3-year-old, and they did for about a year. They saw this particular child psychologist every week, and at the end of that year, the apparently had seen enough to issue a report, and that report stated that she felt that my ex was horrendously abusing my children emotionally and psychologically, and that I should be granted full custody, and that she be supervised. Now, again, not knowing anything about the process, I thought, well, that should be it, right? I mean, you've got a trained child psychologist, court appointed, who's seen the kids every week for a year, 3 kids who are all, fairly old, not, and at that point, none of them were, teenagers, but they were close. I mean, they were at that point, I think, 12, 10, and 8, the 3 oldest ones. Let me ask you this.
So you were court appointed, or you were court ordered to put the kids in therapy. You put the children in therapy, and the therapist said that mom shouldn't have the children. And I remember when you spoke to me before we went on stream, you said that the therapist recommended supervised visitation for mom.
Right.
What did the therapist actually find? Because I remember you said that some very specific things, and so I thought that this would be relevant to the audience as well. Obviously, without doxing your children, as far as their names or anything are concerned, but just kind of give us an idea of what the therapist had noticed in her report and what led her to believe what she did.
Yeah, I mean, the therapist found a combination. The worst things in terms of where the counselor was coming from were that the children were punished for any kind of requests to see me or standing up for me when I would be badmouthed by themselves being run down. For example, one of my children was accused of being autistic over and over and over again. She was told that she was autistic, that she had brain problems, and so forth and so on. Another child was told that she had a speech impediment, and that other children's parents would not allow their children to play with her because she was weird and inappropriate.
All right, let me jump in here real quick. All right, so obviously you're active and involved in the parenting of your children after the divorce. Did the children's doctors, the pediatricians or anybody like that, ever say that there was a concern about autism or anything else?
No, absolutely not.
What about the children's
of course,
school?
the child psychologist? No, they're straight A students, popular, lots of friends. The child psychologist, was, her attitude was no child should be falsely accused of something like that. But in this case, it was especially egregious because there was not even any. It was clearly nothing at all, no concerns whatsoever of these children having any issues, and it was strictly and clearly just an attempt by their mother to destroy their own self-esteem, so that she would more easily be able to control them. So there was absolutely no way that she could honestly have any actual fears about this. Not that if you had fears about that's what you would tell your child, that they're autistic. If you worried that they were autistic, you wouldn't say, "You're autistic, shut up." But that clearly she couldn't even have an honest concern about that, because was absolutely no symptom, and it was all being used, as the counselor found, as a punishment for their affection and love for me. And so the counselor, who had been a child psychologist for 30 years, I believe, and had never once recommended supervised visitation when there was no evidence of physical or sexual abuse at all, which at that point there wasn't. It was based solely on emotional abuse. But she said that was the first time that she had recommended supervised visitation solely based on emotional abuse. But she felt it was that severe, because that was just the tip of the iceberg. There were far more, for example, we had, there was a scheduled phone call that the kids would be allowed to have. And whenever that phone call time would happen, she would start a movie that the kids had wanted to see. And if any of the kids went to talk to me on the phone call, they would not be able to watch any of the movie. They would be excluded. They'd be locked out of the room. Things like that, just multiple things like that came up in the course of the child psychologist discussion with my children.
Right. Well, let me ask you. Let me ask you the group here. Isn't there a diagnosis for that? Isn't it like Munchausen by proxy or something? I don't know.
Munchausen by proxy is when someone harms another person in order to evoke sympathy for themselves.
Got it. Okay. I knew it was something, but I just remember that there was a thing where parents actually tell their kids that they've got these illnesses and ailments for some reason. But I'm thinking that she might have been doing that to get sympathy for herself as well. But again,
accusing the kid of being autistic would be a pretty good Munchausen by proxy.
It actually sounds more like a borderline personality disorder to me.
Too. Yeah.
I guess it doesn't have to be exclusive, right?
Yeah. I gotta go with Paul Elam on this. I think he did a quick analysis of borderline personality disorder for all the women he's known.
Sure.
And of course, it's anecdotal, but he said it's like 95% of women have it. So that's I borderline, yeah, of course, but it's the oh, pity me because my child is autistic. I've seen that scenario repeat itself over and over again too.
Right. Well, definitely a cluster B clusterfuck, as Grizzly would say.
Yeah,
that's about right.
Yeah, and of course, none of this was ever, all of this was behind closed doors to the children. She never voiced any of this to anyone else. It was just it was only behind closed doors with no one else around to the children themselves. And the child psychologist actually did this was before her final report, but the child psychologist actually called my ex on it and said, "Oh, well, if you really feel that way, then we should do an evaluation." Because I'm not seeing any possible evidence of that, but I'd be happy to do evaluation. My ex then, instead of having her do the evaluation, took her to another clinic that apparently had a reputation for being a pill pusher type clinic with kids, and I guess in hopes that they would just default, find something that they could put my poor daughter on meds for. But interestingly, even that clinic, the child psychologist, and she was able to put my poor daughter through a psych eval, just to try to, get something to stick. But the child psychologist came back and said that all the mother's claims about the child seemed completely baseless. That all of my evaluations of the children of the child of my daughter seemed accurate, and that the mother's accusations towards the child seemed motivated by a poor relationship with the child. So basically, in other words, saying the mother is full of shit, the father's right, the kid doesn't have any problems, and the mother is saying these bad things about the child because the mother doesn't like the child, basically. So it exonerated my daughter and got her out of danger of being put on any medications or being, put on it with any stigma, just so my ex could punish her, because she was the one above all the other children who would ask to be with me more, who would dispute whenever she would say bad things about me, and so forth and so on. So that's why she was targeted the most. But in any case, the child psychologist filed that with the court, with the guardian ad litem. Never heard back. Didn't hear back.
Okay. So you still had a guardian ad litem 3 years after the divorce, then?
Yeah, the guardian ad litem apparently just stayed on, and I don't know exactly why. I paid the guardian ad litem more than $20,000, and which was the highest by itself, was the highest amount that any attorney I'd worked with had ever heard of. And
actually,
she never refused to itemize her billing. Right. Let
me break that down a little bit, just so we're on the same page. Usually a GAL, or they call them a custody evaluator or a parenting evaluator, usually they have to file a motion with the court to get paid, but sometimes the courts will give them a blank check. But I've actually seen a lot of GALs that charge between $15,000 and $30,000, and I know that in Washington State, at least on the western side of the mountains, there were many GALs that used their GAL work to buy their new houses in very nice neighborhoods. So this, even though where the jurisdiction, I know where your jurisdiction is, and even though in that jurisdiction it might have been the highest you'd heard of, unfortunately, it's not uncommon.
Yeah. So well, then that would be exactly what happened. But she was owed another $30,000 in addition to the $20,000. So I think, in my opinion, what it seemed to me is that I don't think she was particularly in the tank for my ex throughout the process. But when I stopped paying her, I think at that point things got combative, because she would contact me frequently demanding the money. And we had some hard conversations where I said, look, I can't afford it. Number one. Number two, you didn't do anything to make this case go smoothly or to resolve this situation, to bring a settlement. You didn't do anything. So I'm not going to pay you. And it became very high conflict between me and the guardian ad litem. And I think at that point, it became more almost kind of like a vendetta. Like, I'm going to stay in this, and I'm going to, issue a report in favor of the mother whenever, if ever, one is required. So she never withdrew. But yet she wouldn't do anything on the case for the children. And she never did meet with the children. I mean, all that money, she never met with the children once. And she never talked to the child, the court mandated child psychologist. She never talked to her once, even after she submitted the report claiming that my children were in peril psychologically. She still would not talk to the court appointed, which she had been the one to nominate this child psychologist.
Right.
But she never, did talk.
Yeah. MGTOW Esquire, what's your feedback here?
Sounds like we got some serious misconduct on the part of the GAL, but that's in a lot of cases, there's very few GALs that I have any respect for. I call it unsurprising. Because, I mean, she definitely wasn't looking out for her clients, and she didn't do her due diligence. And if she was supposed to follow up with the counselor and she didn't do that, she just didn't do what she was supposed to do. Simply put.
Right.
So, MGTOW Esquire, in your experience, when you run across a GAL like that, what would typically be your particular response to that as far as in that court proceeding?
I'd move to have her removed. Just get her out of there. Have put in a new motion on the original petition, say, and add the affidavit in the evidence portion of that motion. You'd put the report from the counselor, especially if the report from the counselor includes something along the lines of these children have never spoken to the guardian ad litem. So how can she represent the interests of the children if she's never spoken to them? That would be what I would do. And once that's removed, you could try to have the original judgment vacated, reopen it, and try to get a new guardian ad litem that's actually going to do their job.
And I would just like to mention, I mean, that is what I thought. I thought based on her not being willing to talk to the child psychologist, that would be, a dereliction of duty. But I have broached it with every attorney that I've talked to since then. And number one, not one of the attorneys has seemed to want to have any part of trying to have this guardian ad litem removed, because they all know her. They all depend on her as a guardian ad litem in their other cases, and none of them seem to want to get on her bad side. Number one. Number two, they've all said that even if they did move to have her removed, the judge would not remove her because the judge has a good relationship with her, and the judge isn't going to have her removed. And that number three, she has no obligation to do any work when the payment is behind. She can do whatever work she wants when there's an amount owed.
And I think and here's the thing.
So that's what these attorneys are telling me.
Right.
Who knows if this is accurate?
Right. But here's the thing. Let me jump in here. So here's the thing. I hear this all the time, because what ends up happening is that these fathers go into these divorce proceedings. They get absolutely raked over the coals. They get absolutely financially crucified, because that's what they do. They set the child support too high. I know in your case, she was awarded alimony, even though she was voluntarily underemployed and she had a college degree. I know that, you got all these expenses that you were paid. Like I said, at the end of the divorce, you were paying 80% of your gross income. But then, these whole things where the GAL's like, well, I'm not getting paid, so I'm not going to do anything. That's bullshit. That's completely and entirely unethical. If the GAL is unwilling to do their job, the GAL needs to get off the case, whether you need to remove her from the case or otherwise. And I think that MGTOW Esquire made a great point when he said, make a motion to remove the GAL. And frankly, I would add to that motion. And again, MGTOW Esquire, jump in here if you think I'm off the reservation, but I would add, she says she's not going to do it because she's not being paid. I can't afford for her to continue. So I need a GAL that will work either pro bono or that will work, some other way.
Yeah, court appointed one. I think you're right. But the thing of it is that the ethical duties of an attorney do not hinge upon whether they're being paid or not, especially with a live and active case. Unless the ethical duty would be to withdraw. If you're not getting paid, withdraw. And she's refusing to withdraw just to be spiteful, I guess. I mean, I don't know. It does sound like you've got an incestuous little community there with all the attorneys knowing each other, and I don't know. Maybe you need somebody who's from outside the community who's not welcome at the country club anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, now you did take that report. You gave it to the GAL. The court-appointed therapist decided to file it with the court. There was no response from anybody. Now tell me what you did in response, because I remember this is the meat and potatoes of this stream, I believe. Go on.
Yeah, so I filed. Yeah, now, and this is getting into about 1.5 years at this point ago now. Finally, after nothing was done, and my ex, as soon as my ex found out that she had filed this report, she removed the kids from the counseling. So I hired an attorney to try to do a modification based on the counselor's report, saying, look, the kids are being abused according to the child psychologist. She's recommending supervised visitation and that I get full custody. So therefore, that's a changed circumstance. So, that I'm going to file a modification. So I hired an attorney, and again, get the whole song and dance about, oh yes, this is open and shut. It should only be a couple $1,000. Blah 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 blah. It should be very easy, simple. So I hired this attorney. I'd since found that this attorney is fairly good friends with my ex's attorney, but I didn't know that at the time. But other attorneys that I've come into contact later have said, "Oh yeah, they're tight." So in any case, apparently, I was told all that needed to be done is to get an affidavit from the counselor and to file it and go forward. Well, this attorney, after going back and forth for weeks doing nothing, finally told me that the counselor refused to give an affidavit attesting to the report, and that even though she had the report, the lawyer had the report, she needed an affidavit from the counselor to be able to submit it. I talked to the counselor, and the counselor said she hadn't asked for any affidavit. She'd never asked for any affidavit. So I went back to the lawyer and said, well, she's saying you never asked her for the affidavit. What's going on here? And it went back and forth like that, me trying to get the lawyer to do an affidavit for another couple weeks until I ran out of money again. And the lawyer said, well, I'm going to have to withdraw because you've run out of money again.
And how much money did you spend on that attorney?
That was another almost $10,000. So at this point now, we're between the guardian ad litem, all the original attorneys, this attorney, I'm getting close to $70,000, $80,000 at this point. Somewhere in that vicinity, all told, everything added together. And
you still haven't had a trial date. And
I still haven't had anything. I don't even, and to this day, I still don't know if anything was ever even filed for the modification. I don't even know. I look in the court record, and it doesn't look that anything was filed. So I don't know if this attorney actually did anything at all.
Well,
on the modification.
And what concerns me about this the most, and this is something that I just learned, was that you told me that the mom removed the children from the therapist. Even
right.
That's contempt. MGTOW Esquire, is that right? Yeah. Is that contempt?
Well, it's certainly a violation of a court order.
Right.
So you could file for contempt.
That's what I would have thought. Apparently, okay, so this was what the attorneys that I've talked to since said, that it was the court the court thing putting the kids in the counselor was part of the temporary order, not part of the final agreement that we made. It was only part of the temporary order. And even though the final agreement didn't cancel that out, say, oh, the kids don't have to go anymore, it doesn't address it at all. It doesn't say anything about it, but it does give her final decision-making power on health decisions. So therefore, her argument was, I can remove them because I have final decision-making on health decisions based on the final agreement. And even though the final agreement doesn't say that the temporary order
so then that would
should
not
stop.
that would not be contempt, but I think that an argument could be made, at least a reasonable argument could be made, to put the kids back in therapy and to make sure that, you know, mom goes under a psych eval of some kind as well, given what the psychiatrist or the psychologist said. But again, my concern is that you handed an attorney almost $10,000 and they didn't even do so much as file a modification for dissolution. Now, one of the main reasons I wanted to stream this, well, twofold actually. The first one is that your story is very common amongst men who go through divorce, where you don't necessarily get your day in court, you don't get a trial. There weren't very many major accusations at the time of the divorce, but you still ended up spending, you know, $20,000 on a GAL plus, you know, the $30,000 or $40,000 or even $20,000 on the attorney. You never got a trial date. They just litigated you to death with just a lot of unnecessary, irrelevant discovery. Again, there weren't very many issues here. Your attorney at any point could have stopped and said, this discovery is irrelevant. I'm not going to respond to it. Go play hide and go fuck yourself. And they could have gone to court and they could have argued that in front of a judge, and that probably would have saved you massive amounts of money. The other piece of it is that the settlement that you got wasn't a settlement. It was a shotgun divorce where they said, this is what you're going to do. This is how you're going to handle it. Take it or leave it. And you ended up paying 80% of your income that you couldn't afford. The judge should never have signed that. That's why I talk about this whole idea on my channel. I talk about this idea of the feminist family court. It is absolutely just a tragedy. And this is what judges are doing all across the country. This is a real world example for everybody watching. Single Dad 1990 is giving us a real world example of what the family courts are doing in, you know, post 2010 family court. So it's an absolute travesty. And then on top of that, now you have the psychiatrist or psychologist saying, look, you know, mom is unhealthy. The children are suffering. Mom needs supervised visits. You need to have custody. You go to an attorney. They take almost $10,000 of your money and they don't even file anything in court. And you're still stuck here. And I'm assuming that she still has custody and she's still mentally harming the kids.
Well, yeah, this way, you know, we still have technically joint legal custody, but she has primary residential custody because the kids are with her 70+% of the time, 73% of the time, or what have you. But now the kids over the past year have let me know that physical abuse is now occurring. So my response to that was to confront her and say, you know, I know what you're doing. You need to stop. And I don't know when, and I don't know how, but I'm going to save up money and I'm going to file another modification because I'm not going to let you hurt my kids. Now, someone might ask why I don't report her to CPS and the police. And I've done that twice, or I had done that twice already. The very first time was at the very start of the whole process. You know, she has always had a process, which she stopped for some time. She stopped it during the process of the divorce, but at the very beginning, she was still doing it, where she would use punishments like using her fingernails to pinch, you know, the children. She would smack them in the face. She would kick them. She would hit them on other parts of their body other than their bottoms. And so I reported it to CPS, and CPS came. And her attorney apparently had was a crisis women's abused women's crisis attorney or something like that.
We like to call them DV queens.
Yeah, it obviously was in very good with CPS. I remember I'm there. The CPS agent is there. The police officer's there. The CPS agent is talking to my children. You know, I can't hear the conversation clearly, but I can tell enough from the conversation that my kids are articulating exactly what I reported. The CPS agent comes out, and my ex puts her attorney on the phone with the CPS agent. They talk like long lost sisters. At a certain point in that conversation, the CPS agent excuses herself to talk to this attorney on the more outside the residence. Then she comes in 10, 15 minutes later and says, yeah, so I'm all done here. There's nothing more. You'll be hearing from me at some point. And never heard back.
All right, so let's stop here because I want to reiterate what I told you when we were talking about this when you first told me. Because again, This is a shit show. It's unconscionable and it's completely wrong. So one of the things that I told Single Dad 1990, and this is something for any father going through this. Number one, you still need to continue to report these things to CPS. You still need to report them to law enforcement. Now, the police will not want to take your report because you're a man. So you need to demand the report. You need to go down to the station. You need to request an incident report. And if they won't give it to you, you need to request a staff sergeant to do it. And then you need to document everything. When it comes to CPS, you file your CPS reports, you continue to file your CPS reports, and then you turn around and you document all of that, dates and times and chronology and everything else. And then you request records. You request service episode reports, you request all notes, all contacts, all internal communications, all external communications, whether they be by phone, email, or anything else. And then finally, you keep all that stuff together. And the reason that you do that is this. The abuse of his children is escalating. And I know this as a father whose children were abused. I've been through this very thing, and it is an absolute goddamn nightmare. And so one of the things you have to do, you have to find a way to relieve stress in the meantime, but you save everything because eventually if the abuse continues to escalate and CPS chooses to do nothing, your children before they're age 21 can sue CPS and sue them for stupid amounts of money and hold them accountable and show everybody that, look, your job is to protect children. It is not to protect perpetrators. And what's happening here is that we have a feminist good old boy system where the attorney's a woman. She's a DV queen. The CPS investigators are females and they're hardcore feminists. The judge, I believe, was a feminist. The GAL was a feminist. So, in all these situations, you're basically by yourself. And that's why I tell people, and I said this in my book, The Feminist Lie, you're more likely to get a fair trial as an African-American man in front of a jury of KKK members than you are to get a fair trial in a family court. So basically, those things need to continue to happen. But the other thing I would say as well, Single Dad 1990, and this is especially important, I would contact the school and I would let the school know that you have children that are victims of abuse and that you would like to get the children into counseling to make sure that they're protected. Because the school, the counselors, the teachers, they are mandatory reporters. So you get these children, I mean, you can't be with them the entire time, right? And mom's going to interfere if you try to take these kids to another therapist, though I would do it on my own time. During my residential time, I would absolutely take them to see a therapist. But at the school, at the children's school, it's important to let the school know, look, these are children of abuse. Here is your psych eval. Bring the report from the psychiatrist or the psychologist to the school and have them file it in the children's file so that they know and say, these are kids in need. I need you guys to provide whatever protections you can. Now, the school will do that. The teachers will do that. The in-school counselor will do that. And then what they'll do is they'll try to create relationships with those kids. And then if the children disclose abuse to those therapists, now those therapists can contact CPS and everybody else. And then the question's going to get asked to the first investigator, why did you run around with your thumb up your ass instead of trying to protect these kids? So at the end of the day, the point is this too, is that we want to move Single Dad 1990 from being the witness to being the messenger, because the first thing that they will do as a father is they will try to destroy your credibility or call your credibility into question. That's the nice thing about the facts and the nice thing about having professionals working in these situations, because the facts don't give a shit about your feelings, especially when you're trying to protect children. And this is one of the main indefensible hypocrisies of feminist bigotry, is that they turn around and they're like, well, we protect kids and we protect family, we protect women. Well, yeah, you protect women, you protect female DV perpetrators. And in this case, single dad's ex-wife is a DV perpetrator. She is domestically violent with her children. She's a child abuser. So at the end of the day, the most important thing for this man is to protect his children. And the challenge here is that, before I jump on, single dad, do you mind if I tell him what state this case is in?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. So for anybody listening to this, obviously my email address is missandry.happens@gmail.com. Single dad is actually looking for an attorney in the state of Idaho, a family law attorney whose dick is not in a purse, whose spine is not on layaway, to help him through this process. This man has been victimized by the family court for years. His children are children of abuse, and they are continuing to be abused today. This man has been robbed of $60,000 to $70,000 to $80,000. He's had guardian ad litems that said, I don't really give a shit about the kids, even though that's the entire point that they were assigned. And on top of that, he's had attorneys take his money and not even do anything as minor as like file anything within the court. So I think that when it comes to these types of things, these things are important to deal with. MGTOW Esquire, do you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, I would actually consider going to the Bar Association and filing grievances against these attorneys.
Okay.
That have done you wrong. That would be one of the things I would recommend. You might want to find a malpractice attorney to go after some of these guys.
Malpractice attorney. Okay.
So now we kind of have an idea of where everything is today. Does anybody here on the panel have anything they want to add, any feedback now that you've heard this gentleman's the majority of his story, in broad strokes at least?
As far as I can tell, unfortunately, this is more common than not, and it's tragic, but it still shocks me and does.
Yeah, it's way too common.
And that's the thing that I think is that any dad who's gone through this is their story. I mean, every dad I've talked to, this has pretty much been their story, other than the exception of just a couple who went in with incredibly large war chests and had the fortune to hire a very good attorney who was actually, at least mercenary enough to fight as long as they got paid. But the thing is that when I tell this story to anyone else who hasn't gone through this, people are literally incredulous. And that's, I think, the thing that the biggest problem that we face is that people think that the system is reasonable. When I tell people that the counselor issued this report and that the court did nothing, they don't believe it. They don't believe it. When I tell the court that when I tell people that this is what I'm having to pay, and the current situation now where my ex is demanding even more money and falsifying her income to try to demand more money, and all the different things that I've said to people in regard to the situation, people who haven't gone through it, male and female, do not believe it. They don't believe it. And I think that's the thing that I just wish somehow we could get through is getting the public aware of this, because I know there are vast numbers of people who are complete drones and who are part of this man-hating culture and dad-hating culture. But there's also a lot of people who aren't, who think this is, why is this happening? This shouldn't be happening to you. And they think somehow I'm doing something wrong, that I've been incompetent somehow. And that's why this is happening. They do not believe that the system is broken.
So let me just chime in real quick. This is, when we talk about gynocentrism, this is what we're talking about. This is a problem with the feminist side of the aisle that are controlling the family courts, but it's also a big problem with the traditional side of the aisle, the traditional conservatives. They also don't believe this stuff. They
Right.
are very quick to blame men for everything. They don't want women to be blamed for anything. And you know, it's not, it's a cultural problem that has to do with the narrative projection. The narrative projection from one side is sugar and spice and everything's nice, and this it's the same from the other side. It's just that
Yes.
one side sees, you know, housewives in aprons, and the other side sees, you know, blue-haired marching soldiers. But it's the same narrative, and so that's why it's not. In my experience, that's why this information doesn't get out there, because nobody wants to believe it. It's not that they don't believe it; they don't want to believe it. They'll actively fight against believing that this is true, because if it is true, that means their entire concept of male-female. That means they'll have to accept that the contract between men and women in this country has been broken.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
and I think the other piece here too is that, you know, this was her cash and prizes. I mean, this kind of points to, you know, there's my plug for the documentary. But the point is that she got cash and prizes. You know, the single dad was destroyed. Single dad 1990 was destroyed in the process, financially and emotionally. Now his children continued to be victimized, and she has no accountability for it. This is the commonplace sort of thing. So I do have a question for you, single dad 1990. When you reached out to me, you wanted to hire me. Talk to me a little bit about that, and talk to me about what my response was to you, and what you thought of that.
Well, yeah, I mean, my first instinct was, because I've talked with, you know, in trying to pursue another modification, talking with attorneys, and again having the same thing of these guys seem like complete, you know, just the same as all the other attorneys, just completely useless. And so I wanted to hire you because you know the law, and you actually, you know, have said many things that show that not only are you capable, but of course, you know, that you care. But of course, you know, pointed out that you're not legally allowed to give me, you know, you know, to I can't legally retain you. So that's, you know, it's unfortunate, but, you know, it leaves, that's the essential problem that I and every other dad face, is that we don't have anyone to hire. That as broke as the system is, as damaged as it is, as completely gynocentric as it is, as man-hating as it is, the provisions are still there that if we had access to decent attorneys, we still could at least salvage something.
Right.
I mean, I would have at least gotten 50-50. Now, should that woman have 50% of the time with those children? Of course not. She is a negligent, abusive parent who is committing fraud on the state to get the child support and food stamps and everything that she gets. She's abusing the children. She shouldn't get 50% of the time. But at least, if I'd had a good attorney in the beginning, I would have gotten 50%. And I think a lot of dads would be able to get at least 50% if they had a good attorney, but there just aren't. There just aren't good attorneys. And that's the problem.
Well, with the exception of our very own MGTOW Esquire, I've had the honor of being in court with him, and I know that he is a very sincere and strong litigator who does stay within the four corners of the law. So there is that.
I do my best.
But I also will say one other thing too. Even though I can't accept money to help single dad 1990, one of the reasons that I have a Patreon is that when people support my channel, that gives me more time to help people like this, because I do it for free. And I told single dad, I said, look, I'll do everything I could do for you as time allows, and I'll do it for free. Because, I mean, obviously, ethically, I can't charge him. But one of the reasons I have a channel is so that I can help people. I mean, you could be a YouTube content creator and just make content randomly and talk with people online and give an opinion online, you know, and monetize that, and that's okay. But one of the things that I try to bring to my YouTube channel is not only what I'm doing to help people with my videos, but also to be able to communicate with people offline so that I can help them as well. So, if anybody is watching this or watches this video and understands it, like, they know somebody who may need some help, people can join my Patreon or my Subscribestar for $20 a month. And that gives them access to my Discord channel, which is where we're at right now. And I can talk to you one-on-one. And, if you want to tell your story on a stream, like we're doing here with Single Dad 1990, I can do that too. There's a lot of good guys here. There's a lot of good feedback. There's a lot of knowledge here. MGTOW Esquire is definitely a part of my Discord. And I do have another attorney that I'll be talking to here in the next month or two that I'll be streaming with, who's a very high-profile, prominent attorney who is capable of doxing themselves. And I have a lot of other things going on too to try to help people, in addition to just making YouTube videos, to try to help them outside of YouTube as well, because these things have real world consequences, and so they need real world solutions beyond just making videos. Does anybody else have anything they want to say before we turn it over to the Q&A? I'll take that as a no. Lone Wolf, are you still with me?
I am.
Okay, so guys, obviously we don't have a lot of people watching right now, but let's do this. If you have a question for myself or the guest or anybody on the panel that is relevant to this stream, go ahead and put in caps and brackets question, and then who your question is to, and then what your question is. And if we get a lot of questions, please try to not make the question a multi-part question. If you have follow-along questions, we can definitely answer those as well. But yeah, we'll just turn on the Q&A right now, and if we have any questions, then we'll go ahead and address those. If we don't, then we'll shut down the stream very shortly. So if you have any questions, ask them right now.
I'll just say, as a layman listening to your story, Single Dad, if I hadn't already known this was, I understand what you meant by no one believes it. Because when I first came into this, I was a little bit incredulous as well. But then I started listening. There was just too much evidence. And so when I finally let go of the idea that, well, maybe there is something going on here, I realized there really was. So I was just going to say, it's more of a psychological or a social problem than it is an information problem, because it's all out there. People could know this tomorrow if they just had the information, but they don't choose to.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good point. It is a good point that the people are deceiving themselves, but it doesn't. It's the position that we're in. It's the same. It's the same position either way. We either have. If we don't have the means, then we're totally screwed. If we have the means, I've become totally impoverished. All my family members have impoverished themselves helping me, and all to never have even been able to really fight for my children. Never really been able to do it because there's, we've just had fraudulent advisors. So, knowing what to do, and in my position now, I have no idea what I'm going to do if I can't hire an attorney. Well, DDJ's been great to give different make some points here and just not as formal legal advice or anything, but just thoughts that I could take into consideration that if I had an attorney, would be great, but without an attorney, I have no means of.
Let's yeah, and let me say something as well. I couldn't find an attorney in my case either. So one of the things that I did in my case, and I encourage everybody in their case to do this, is to learn the court procedure, to learn the rules of evidence in your jurisdiction, and to learn what the laws are. And you can go to the local law library, usually located in the courthouse or at the closest law school to you, and you could read books on, how to litigate. You may not be able to check them out, but you can read them there on site. But as far as court rules and court procedures, many of those things are online and they're free. So if you're willing to invest the time and the energy in doing those things, that's going to help your case a lot, because they can't take the knowledge from you. And at the end of the day, the nice thing about that is that you're going to get the knowledge to empower you to protect your children. And in this case, there might be a possibility where you do win with an attorney or without an attorney. But the other advantage is that the next time an attorney tries to bullshit you, once you actually have that knowledge, now you can hold them accountable, and there you go. So I think that, that's my thought process. MGTOW Esquire, what are your thoughts?
I was just looking into Idaho attorneys. I wanted to, I apologize. I was kind of distracted there. Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. I was drifting away for looking for a solution instead of paying attention.
No. That's what we're here for. I mean, we're looking for solutions.
I just sent Single Dad a message. There's an attorney I found that might be able to help him out in Idaho. So hopefully it's not one of the ones he's already contacted, but we'll see. I'm sorry. I missed about the last minute.
Right. What I was saying is that, basically learn the court rules, learn rules of evidence so that he can be empowered to fight this. The other thing I'd say too is, a lot of these family law attorneys, they seem to commit malpractice as a standard procedure. What's your feedback there?
That seems very alarming, but I've never even been to Idaho. It sounds like it's in dire need of someone shaking them up, someone from another state perhaps. But I've seen that in other states though, smaller states, smaller communities. You can get an entrenched little cabal, all the way from the bar association all the way down into the courts, from the judge all the way down to the bar association and all the young attorneys coming up. And if nobody wants to rock the boat just keeps going in the direction it's going. And it's been a long, slow slide. And I remember reading Judge Bork's book, The Political Seduction of the Law. This starts in law school. This narrative begins in law school. So coming across an attorney with a different point of view than the feminism is unusual. They're almost non-existent. So anyway, as far as learning the procedures, yeah, if there's no attorney that can help you and no attorney you can afford to hire, you're probably better off trying to do it yourself. But you could look at things like the NOLO books to give you a clue as to what you're trying to do and what you're trying to ask for. There's, the rules of court for the state. Those are all pretty useful. I don't even know if Idaho has a NOLO book for divorce and custody issues, but it's possible. I would look into that. And it's NOLO, NOLO.
Okay.
That would be a good place to start. Almost every city has a law library. You can go into the law library and talk to the librarian and ask for materials to teach yourself about family court proceedings. That would be the way to do it. If you're forced to go it alone, that'd be the way to do it.
And like I said, the nice thing about having this Discord is that you've got access to those of us who are in the voice chat. You got APOC, you've got Plumber, you've got myself, you've got Lone Wolf, you've got MGTOW Esquire, and a few other people that are there as well who might be able to give you some feedback throughout the time as well, because you are a patron. So you do have that as a resource, and then go from there. And again, if you're listening to this, if you're a viewer and you're listening to this stream and you know of a decent attorney who gets results for men, not an attorney who advertises as a men's rights attorney. I don't want an attorney that markets himself as a men's rights attorney, but an attorney that actually gets results in Idaho. Shoot me a message at missandrew.happens@gmail.com. Let's see if we can help this man protect his children, because at the end of the day, that's what we want. We want our families protected, and we want the next generation squared away. Because the reality is that the single biggest indicator of whether or not a child is going to grow up and be a criminal or grow up and suffer from all these issues is whether or not they were victimized by child abuse as a child. So the sooner that we can work to stop this together, the better it's going to be for everybody involved, including these kids and eventually single dad 1990s grandchildren. So with that said, single dad, is there anything that you want to leave us with before we shut down the stream?
No, I just, I appreciate all your help, and, to anyone who sees this, just, keep in mind that, there's certain things that you really need to avoid. Do your homework and don't panic. But realize that the main thing you face is the procedural morass of the system that is designed to make you lose. And it's, people think of it in the sense of like that Dustin Hoffman movie where it's this, in the courtroom and the poor dad is getting beat up in court. And that does happen to a lot of dads too. But the thing that people forget is that the system is designed to wreck you long before you ever get to court, and just be smart from day one. And that's really the only thing that I wish that I could go back and do differently, is just to have held on to that money and really done my homework and found an attorney that I felt absolutely would fight for me for whatever reason, even if just for mercenary reasons. Right.
Yeah. And the one of the things, the statements that I've heard over the past few years that rings bells right now is the procedure itself is the punishment.
That's so true. It
just grinds you up over time. And there's, by the time you're ground up, that's when they move in for the kill. Mm-hmm. So it's a war of attrition 90% of the time.
That's true.
And,
yeah.
Well, so let's go ahead and kind of end that there. Thank you everybody for showing up today to check out the stream. As a viewer, thank you everybody participating. Thank you APOC. Thank you Lone Wolf, Plumber. And obviously, thank you MGTOW Esquire. Appreciate you taking the time out today. Single Dad.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Single Dad 1990. Thank you for having the courage to not only contact me, but to go on a live stream and kind of talk about your situation. Hopefully we can bring some attention to this issue and get some more of these men the help they need. And hopefully we can come back later and we can talk about your case. And hopefully we've got a happy ending in the non-massage parlor style with your kids. So, but with that said, let me go ahead and enter into the shill zone. If you guys are watching this Twitch stream and you're a member of Amazon Prime, you can subscribe to my Twitch channel for free, and I get financially compensated for it. I think I get like $2.50 per person who subscribes to it. You can also support me through subscribestar.com at Miss Andrew today, or you can support me at DDJ at Patreon. YouTube has demonetized this channel, so no more annoying commercials, but with that, the ad revenue that goes with that is also gone. Another way you can support the channel is by checking out my sponsors, Cash and Prizes, the documentary. Check out their GoFundMe, and check out my other sponsor, The Dollhouse. And if you're up for a quick yet amazing read, check out The Feminist Lie. It Was Never About Equality. It's a book I wrote that is rated 4.5 out of 5 stars on Amazon and has been on multiple bestseller lists on Amazon in the #1 spot in the entire time it's gone through. So with that, thank you guys, everybody, for tuning in. I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit of post-production on this. I will definitely upload it to YouTube. And you're going to have some more information shortly about when DDJ's Inferno will run, like what specific date and time. I'm thinking Saturdays right now, but we will see. And then in addition to that, we're going to be running the Red Pill Roundtable once I can coordinate schedules and get specific roundtable hosts to agree to do so. The hosts that, or I should say the panel that I mentioned on my announcement video will most likely be the panel that's there probably with the inclusion of MGTOW Esquire as he's available and others. So if that's something that you, as a viewer, want to be a part of, we have more than enough room to have guest panelists from time to time. So we just want to make sure that we get a good cross section of people for the conversations that we have. So thank you again for tuning in. Appreciate it, as this is the first DDJ's Inferno back from a long hiatus now that I have first world internet again. So take care, guys, and enjoy the rest of your day.